What is up with all the destruction at the end of Man of Steel? Now that's a good question. I don't mean the one deliberately caused by the Kryptonians. I don't mean the one being done with the Word Engine. I don't mean the one where they actually create a black hole right over Metropolis, well, the ruins of Metropolis. And I also don't mean the destruction by the military where they authorize the use of deadly force in a populated area. I mean the one that is actually caused by Superman, by Kal-el, or Clark Kent. Spoilers. Basically, when this movie came out, some people did complain about that it was like really weird that he was partly responsible for quite a large-scale destruction of Metropolis. And now that we see in the new Flash movie, there will be basically a rehashing of the same story, that the Kryptonians are coming and destroying a bunch of stuff. I'm quite curious how they will address this issue and if there's going to be any sort of difference in handling the whole situation, since now Supergirl is going to be the one fighting the Kryptonians alongside a couple of Flashes and Batmans. Now, the interesting part is, I was really curious about this, if I remember correctly, what exactly happened at the end of the movie, and I rewatched it and made a few notes about the events, how they unfolded, and how the whole thing was affecting everything that happened at the end. Now, first of all, the interesting part is that people who complained about all this destruction seem to have forgotten that this was basically on a new origin story for Superman in the Snyderverse. Now, this Superman was already active without a suit, without officially announcing himself. He was working in secret, basically, just trying to help out wherever he could. But he was mainly focusing on saving people from disasters, like a burning oil rig or ships being tipped over, or things like that happen, accidents, basically. But he never actually had to face anyone in a fist fight. Basically, if you look back at the scenes of the movie, there are scenes from his childhood where he basically has to hold back because he already knows the level of his strength, and he cannot allow himself to get sort of emotional or get into an actual fight to really punch someone, because it could be lethal. And that is hammered throughout the whole movie multiple times, that he has to hold back, he has to keep his identity secret, he has to keep everything secret and not reveal anything or damage anything with his activities, unless you count that one occasion where he twisted a truck on a pole or whatever. So that's kind of like was really mean. That was someone's livelihood, but whatever. So basically here we have a Superman with all his powers, flight, super strength, various super senses and all that super speed, but he never threw a punch at anyone, basically. He only punched inanimate objects when that was required. And suddenly he's faced with multiple opponents who are basically all of them trained warriors, trained soldiers, fighters. Basically, they weren't just trained to be fighters. In the Kryptonian society, they were bred to be fighters. They were genetically engineered to fight for Krypton, for every aspect of their culture. Now, this already creates an interesting situation, because if you ever watch any fights between professionals and amateurs, even if just a security camera recording, or you go look up these fights where some loudmouth person said, oh, I can beat this or that professional, and then they go into the ring and they don't really last very long. Now, that's kind of the situation here at the end, near the end of the movie, that basically in sense of experience and routine and skills, Clark, Superman, is utterly outmatched. And apart from that, although he's stronger and faster and has all his extra senses and all that, he's basically several levels of power above the Kryptonians. He doesn't fully know how to use that in a situation of an actual fight. It's not like a building falling on someone, or a oil rig catching fire that he just has to get the people out and then it's sorted out. No, he has to actively chase the target. He has to actively hold back the target. And this whole situation with the Kryptonians attacking is, well, quite fittingly, absolutely alien for Clark. So he doesn't know what to do with them and is absolutely unprepared for this whole situation. Now, apart from this, there is a quite deep emotional factor in this whole thing. When the Kryptonians appear, up until that point, he thought that he was the only living Kryptonian. He just heard about Zod and his activities back on Krypton, but he basically thinks that he's the only one. He's kind of lost in that sense. Then he finds out that there are other Kryptonians, and that Zod, the boogeyman, told him about his father's remaining program, is coming. And in their first couple of meetings, Zod quite clearly explains Clark that they want to destroy humanity. They want to get rid of humans and re-establish Krypton on Earth, change Earth into Krypton. And it is absolutely clear in the visual presentation and what I said, that they simply do not want the humans. They want to get rid of all the humans from the planet. Now, this immediately raises the stakes and makes it clear for Superman that these people need to be stopped, because otherwise the whole planet will be eradicated. That's already a huge stake in the whole thing. This revelation happens on one of the Kryptonian ships, or on the main Kryptonian ship, because later it splits apart and whatever. So basically, this revelation happens on the Kryptonian ship, where Clark was already, or Superman was already affected by the Kryptonian atmosphere, which weakened him, and he lost his strength, he lost his invulnerability, they took blood from him, and so on. So he was already put in a very vulnerable position, and he was not at his peak. Now, that situation runs into another scene where basically his love interest, although quite fresh, but still a love interest, is in mortal danger, falling to the earth in a faulty escape pod. That's already an emotional stake for him. So he already gets a bit basically pumped up with adrenaline and all that. So he has to run, save his loved one. Now, after saving Lois and almost losing her coming out of this whole situation with the Kryptonians, which is quite a complex emotional situation for someone like that, the Kryptonians flat out threaten his mother, his adoptive mother, but still mother in every sense of the way. So this utterly triggers Superman. Like he completely loses it. He already lost his adoptive father. He lost his real parents, which he learned later on. He thought that he's the only Kryptonian. Suddenly there are other Kryptonians who are utter bastards, to be honest, and want to just make humanity extinct in all the sense of the meaning. And just got out of that emotional scene with almost losing his love interest. And suddenly his mother is threatened by these highly militaristic, very, very flat-out evil and dedicated people. Now, this is the first scenes where he loses it. He just smashes flying into Zod and screaming at him and punching him, pushing him down into the ground and pushing him through corn silo, and then ending up in a gas station and causing big explosion, destruction, and whatever. Now, you could say that, yeah, here he's utterly emotional. He's just jumped on someone who was threatening his mother, and it's a very human reaction. It's an understandable reaction. So, yeah, that sort of level of destruction it's not forgivable, but you can understand why that happened, why this whole thing was going on. And then at this part, the helmet, the protective shielding of the helmet on Zod's head is damaged. And he starts breathing in the atmosphere of Earth and having all the effects that Clark went through when he was a kid. And suddenly he's unable to fight. He sees through his hands the bones and everything, the X-ray vision kicking in, the super hearing kicking in, and he's overloaded with the sensation, and it physically hurts him. So he's unable to continue the fight. Now he's taken away by a couple of his compatriots, and then Faora and the big guy, I just call him Big Guy, I forgot his name to be honest, take over the fight. Almost instantly, it's obvious that Faora is learning very quickly. She immediately knows how to use super speed and is really, really strong. So like really putting up a good fight with Kal-el. And the big guy is just massively strong. It's like, it seems that the super strength is the very first power that kicked in for his biology. Now, in this fight, Superman is already utterly overwhelmed. He's unable to deal with Faora's skill level. If you slow down the fight scene, you can see that Clark is basically throwing haymakers, like a very, very clumsy way of fighting, just basic punches and not really impacting anything properly, with really bad technique. But Faora is just dodging everything and retaliating, and riposte after riposte after riposte comes in and uses special techniques to hurt Clark in many ways. And so it's obvious that she's a much, much better fighter than he is. So he basically has to find some way to overwhelm her. That would be the power of flight, which still surprises the Kryptonians sometimes, because they still cannot fly. They can jump high, like the original Superman back in the 30s, but they still couldn't grasp this whole flying thing. Now, with the fight of Faora has a bit of a speech about evolution and morals and how they are superior, the Kryptonians are superior, because they are not bound by the morals and the ethics and all that of humanity and Superman himself. And that's why they should rule, because they are superior, because they are free of these things. Now this just hammers in even deeper the fact that these people are just insanely evil. Like they don't consider themselves evil, they consider themselves so superior that they are not even approached by the idea that they are doing something bad. They are just mentally on a completely different level. And you cannot, basically diplomacy would not work with people like that. When this happens and Faora expresses this superior mentality, Clark again loses it a bit, smashes through a wall, and they are ending up in various buildings and all sorts of things, so large-scale destruction. But if you see the fight, in most of the cases, Faora and the big guy are trying to keep him back and push him down and keep fighting with him and throwing him into buildings and all that. So basically, Clark is also held in that fight by them, and also trying to get out and find a different way to approach the whole thing. Now, during the fight, the military is already fighting them as well. They are shooting at them, and you can hear that they've got authorization to use deadly force, which is kind of weird right over a populated town. So where are the civilians in all the surrounding houses? But you have to consider the fact that they are facing a planetary invasion. Like, these people came over and they want to take over the whole planet and get rid of humanity. So, yeah, the minority-majority balance is like quite obvious in this case. So they would rather sacrifice a whole town to save the entirety of humanity. Now, during the fight, the military realizes that Superman is on their side, he's not an enemy, and basically Superman is quite heavily beaten by Faora and the big guy. During the fight, the big guy was actually punched into a few train carts, like into a train station that explodes. Now, this one gave me a red flag regarding Superman. Basically, he just jumped up and punched the guy directly into the trains. Why? What was going on? I can understand attacking Zod and attacking Faora because they were both at the specific moment of Superman's attack were either expressing horrible intentions or were actually threatening his mother. So the emotional conclusion was the lashing out on those opponents. But the big guy was trying to take out soldiers and jumping around, and it wasn't really that scene. Well, he took him out with the punch, but he punched him into the trains. And that was weird for me. And that gave me a bit of a different view later on the whole scene, on the whole rest of the movie. Now, after this, they realize that they are in really deep trouble. The Kryptonians are releasing the world engine, which then starts compressing the core of the planet and basically turning Earth into a much denser, heavier planet, turning it into a new Krypton. So at this point, destruction is like over all scales. Metropolis is gradually being flattened down and turned into a crater. And on the other side of the planet, we don't see much. It's happening in the ocean. After Superman destroys the world engine on the other side of the planet, he travels around to catch Zod in the Genesis ship, which is capable of recreating basically the Kryptonian race. And here, again, we have a scene where Superman gets highly emotional. He's trying to argue with Zod about the merits or the flaw in this whole thing that they would be destroying humanity by rebirthing Krypton, and still to no avail. So he basically lashes out again, saying that Krypton had its chance and destroys the ship. Basically, this was a really weird thing because, again, he lashed out, he did something that results in another disaster because the ship starts exploding, falling apart, and it crashes right into Metropolis, destroying buildings and falling through a bunch of stuff and all that. So again, this was another one that it could have been avoided. Like he kind of lost track of what's going on and in what position he is, and lost track of the consequences of his actions. Now, after this, the military with Lois and Dr. Hammond create a singularity that destroys the Kryptonian ship, sucks them into a black hole and annihilates them basically. So Zod is the only one remaining. Now, at this point, Zod is already getting a grasp of this whole super power thing, like knowing how to handle his strength, and flat out shows that he's able to fly as well. So that's when the one-on-one fight starts between Superman and Zod. Now, in this fight, if you look at it, Zod is the one mostly pushing Superman into buildings and causing a lot of destruction. Actually, Clark tries to take him away, so he punches him mid-air multiple times, like away from buildings, but they still fall back and still come back to the buildings. Now, there's one scene where Zod suddenly has the heat vision kicking in. Now, that's the part where they are destroying the Wayne Enterprises building. In Batman vs. Superman, there's a callback to this scene where Bruce saw them fall into the building and just sees that the heat vision is just slashing the building apart. Well, that was actually by Zod. But that was also like not a deliberate thing. That was the first time that it kicked in, and he didn't know what to do and was just moving around, cutting the building to pieces. And after that, they fight some more. They go out into outer space, and then they fall back. And basically, mid-fall, they are struggling to get a better position, and they fall into the train station, where the final scene of the fight unfolds, where Zod is threatening to kill with his heat vision a family, and Superman is trying to hold him back. Now, if you see that how they are positioned, Clark's hand is already on Zod's head. So in the position which leads to the final solution of the scene. And he's already struggling against him, aiming his head away, trying to aim his head away from the family of victims. And he's running out of options, because in this situation, Zod is already as strong as he is. He already knows how to fly. He has the heat vision. He has all the senses under control and all that. And on top of it, so basically he's got all the powers now that Superman has. And on top of it, he's a trained soldier and a peak warrior. And apart from that, he's an absolute zealot. He's not just a zealot. He's not just firm in his belief to fight for Krypton. He was, don't forget, he was actually genetically engineered with that. It's like an inbred instinct in his very core of his whole being. In that situation, Clark is really just running out of options, and basically the only chance is to stop this person, because talking with him didn't work. He, on top of all of this, Zod already lost all his friends, all his compatriots, his entire planet. Clark basically made it impossible to repopulate the planet with Kryptonians. So he's like just lashing out at everything. So in that sense, it's understandable what happens, that Superman does the move which ends Zod. Which is also a highly emotional one, because Zod was the last Kryptonian apart from him. And he was a monster, and he had to be stopped. So that's also a bit of a highly emotional and very, very complex situation for someone. Now, what could be sort of the explanation of all the destruction? Because, yeah, Kryptonians wanted to destroy Earth. They didn't care about humans. That's understandable. They just wanted to get rid of everyone, flatten the town, flatten Metropolis, create a new planet for themselves. The military was fighting for utter survival. They wanted to resolve this. They wanted to get to the end of this. They were ready to sacrifice an entire city, an entire town, or whatever it takes just to save their entire planet. So that's understandable. But then there were those occasions when Superman made the very, very reckless moves, which resulted in extra destruction. And didn't really seem to know how to contain the situation. Now, what was the source of this? How did this come about? Because in the comic books and in previous movies, Superman is always like trying to minimize destruction, trying to save people and make sure that everything is remaining as safe as possible. Even later in Batman vs. Superman, they are fighting Doomsday on a separate island in a harbor, just to make sure that there are no people around being affected. Now, the solution, the answer to this whole thing is in one scene in a couple of sentences, which was at the beginning of the fight where Superman was attacking Zod. Right after Zod tried to threaten his mother, and he was punching him, and they went through the silo into the gas station, and then Zod was taking off the helmet and just getting overwhelmed with his new senses. And this is the point where Superman tells him that he knows how it hurts getting these senses activated, and he says, "My parents taught me to hone my senses, to focus on just what I wanted to see." Now, this explains a lot, because this is not a Superman that's utterly chill and in a Zen mood and controlling everything and filtering everything and all that. No, this Superman is utterly overwhelmed by his own senses, and he has to keep an extreme level of control to shut 99.9% of everything that's around him out, because otherwise he's incapable of thinking, he's incapable of moving, because the bombardment of on his senses are just so overwhelming that he becomes non-functional. And this one thing, to focus on just what I wanted to see, means that in a high stakes situation, he can only see what's right in front of him. He can only focus on that one thing, that one opponent. And if you've ever been in a fight, even for sports or in real life, when someone is threatening you, when you have to take someone down, the rest of the world doesn't really matter anymore. You're focusing on every movement of that one person. You're watching every little move, his positioning, his stance, his actions, his whatever he moves, what he prepares and all that. And that takes a huge amount of energy, and you're focusing on that person. And that's why you might not necessarily see what's behind you or what's going on. That takes a whole level of different training and set of skills to be able to do that. So basically, here we have a Superman who's constantly blocking out most of what's around him. And he's put in an utterly new situation of having equal level or more or less equal level opponents, and they have to be stopped. So he simply doesn't have, so to say, the luxury of thinking about everything else, because he doesn't even know how. He doesn't have the practice. He just had to focus on saving people out of disastrous situations. And here he has to fight humanoid opponents who are just as strong and more experienced than he is. He's already sort of outmatched. So he simply didn't realize, didn't even see what's going on. When he punched the big guy into the trains, he just wanted to punch the big guy out. He wanted to knock him out because he was way stronger and he was already causing trouble, and he was already realizing, Superman was already realizing that this fight is not really going ahead. It's not really a winnable fight, basically. He couldn't focus on anything else than trying to get rid of Zod or stopping Zod, and that's why with his one-on-one fight with Zod, buildings were destroyed left and right, because he was just trying to get to the end of Zod. And that's something I found really interesting, that basically this one sentence, to focus on just what I wanted to see, this explained why he was simply unable to realize what was going on to its full extent. Like he realized, but in the fight, in the actual scenes, in the actual situations, he didn't have the capacity to focus on these things, because throughout his whole life he had to suppress everything. It wasn't just that his senses had to be suppressed, that he had to block out everything, but he also had to suppress his skills, his powers. He wasn't allowed to throw a punch, to get into an actual fight. It's like this was his first real fight in his life. He couldn't practice a lot of things. So yeah, basically the whole thing was understandable. With this single sentence, that he basically has to deliberately focus on that one thing that's in front of him that he wants to see. Otherwise, he's overwhelmed and he's not able to function. So, yeah. And regarding that, I would be interested to see how in the Flash movie the new Supergirl is going to handle this. Because if she's an actual Kryptonian, and if she goes through the same things and has the same powers kicking in, yeah. First of all, I will be interested how much the creators of the Flash movie watched Man of Steel, and if they remember these things in the movie, that how Clark went through these processes and how it worked. And I would be really interested to see if the end result will be a bit different, if the level of the destruction will be different, or it will be relocated to some other place, and also if the final solution for it will be different. Because if they try to go a route where they just talk Zod down, basically they resolve it in a diplomatic way, that's gonna be really weird. because with Zod, it was clear that diplomacy is not a solution. It's impossible to talk him out of recreating Krypton. And if they do something like that in the Flash movie, then that's gonna be a bit sketchy, to be honest. So that would be basically my 2 cents about Man of Steel, specifically the destruction at the end of the movie. And I would really like to know how other people see this. So if you have your opinion regarding that, or if you agree or disagree, then please comment on that. If you like this video, then likes are highly appreciated. If you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, then please subscribe. If you know someone who would benefit some way from this video, then please share the link with them. And if you'd like to support me through other means, then you can do that via Patreon, where I'm sharing early access and exclusive content, or by buying any of the products with my designs on Redbubble, or maybe a copy or two of my coloring storybook for kids on Amazon, The Adventures of the Smallest Astronaut, Book 1. So, thank you for your time. Bye.